Welcome to Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury, and I'm delighted today to welcome Steve Wright onto my podcast. Steve Wright is a Northeast born and bred businessman come entrepreneur who spent the first 3 decades of his life working within large corporates like Volvo and KB, climbing the corporate ladder before becoming MD of the GT Group, a subsidiary of KB, only a handful of years ago. Since then, Steve went about helping build a management team who could collectively initiate the management buyout of the business locally, which of course now means Steve, alongside 3 of his colleagues, own 100% of Northeast-based GT Group, a business last year that turned over north of £40 million and delivered north of 3 million of EBITDA. I'm really looking forward to understanding a bit more about Steve's corporate career, what has led to this point, in turn giving Steve and management the opportunity to buy 100% of GT Group from our capital, and also perhaps really just getting under the skin of Steve to understand his why, the hurdles he's overcome along the way, and perhaps some of the things that on reflection he knows now which he would definitely have benefited from knowing 4 decades ago. I welcome you, our viewers, to this podcast, and I hope that for sure, not only do you find it insightful, but you can take away a number of gems that you can implement into your own career and in turn business. Steve Wright, first of all, can I start by welcoming you to our Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you in the hot seat today.
Very good. Thank you, Carl. I get a little bit nervous when you use the word entrepreneur. You know, I don't necessarily consider myself as an entrepreneur. I've kind of, I got myself here. Hopefully I did good, but entrepreneur, it has quite a few connotations. Not sure if I fulfill all of those, but nevertheless, here I am.
Indeed. And actually, Steve, perhaps that's where we should start today's conversation, because as you say, you perhaps don't feel as if you are an entrepreneur, even though, of course, now you do own, alongside 3 other individuals, a very large manufacturing business here in the region. So what do you think an entrepreneur is, and why don't you feel worthy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of aware that an entrepreneur is someone who very much puts, a stake, in place, takes risks, financial risks, personal risks. And of course, we have done that, myself and my colleagues. We have done that to a certain extent, albeit only recently, having gone through the NBO recently that we have just completed. But leading up to that, not necessarily, putting my own kind of funds in place, if you like, to kind of propel myself and my career. I've certainly given a lot of personal sacrifices, I would say, but not necessarily financial sacrifices.
Yes. Interesting. No, I do. And as you say, perhaps the misunderstanding is that to be an entrepreneur, you have to be financially exposed and at risk, because of course that's not necessarily the case. I guess an entrepreneur is someone who sees opportunity and takes advantage of that opportunity, which of course is exactly what you and your management team at GT Emissions have just done as a consequence of your completed management buyout. But perhaps, Steve, we can pick that thread back up in a short while. So, of course, Steve, I know you very well, not only as a friend, but as someone I've just advised on a management buyout. But for our viewers who don't know you, it would be fantastic just to perhaps find out a little bit more about your corporate career, perhaps up until 5 years ago when things started to change.
Yeah, a pretty long corporate career. Actually, going back to the very beginning, I started as a truck mechanic, in actual fact. But then, working for a local company in the Northeast, quite a tough, work environment, tough boss, very demanding. But I think that was the starting point, understanding what people want and that what the boss wanted and what the company needed, and not, and fulfilling that, not kind of sloping away and kind of leaving that, actually achieving that. So that put me in good stead in terms of, my work ethic, I would say. But then I had an aspiration in being a truck mechanic. We were working a lot specifically with Volvo, the Volvo brand, Volvo trucks. So I had an aspiration to move to Volvo trucks, and that sort of led me on the career path. Again, working for another company as a kind of a stepping stone to get into Volvo, and then ultimately working with a local Volvo company in the Northeast, and then ultimately moving on to working overseas with Volvo in different areas with Volvo trucks, then later with Volvo buses, and then with Volvo construction equipment. So in all around 25 years overseas.
Yeah, which is such a phenomenal career, right? 2.5 decades with the Volvo business, granted different divisions or parts, obviously. Yes. Just to talk a little bit about your experience of working overseas, and I guess there's two sides I'd love to understand. I mean, first of all, did those opportunities get presented to you and you took advantage, or did you actually carve those opportunities up for yourself?
I think I pretty much carved them out, Carl, to be truthful. I guess I was inspired by my dad. He worked overseas, he worked in Saudi. So I kind of had a view and a vision that I wanted to work overseas. But then it came about from, I think I saw an advertisement in the national newspaper for a supervisor, in fact, if I recall, overseas in Saudi, and that kind of interested me. I guess referring to my dad's history, and I pursued that. It was kind of an agent that was taking the lead on this, and then had a discussion with the agent, and things were going pretty well, and then I was actually offered the job. But at that time we had a very young family, and I thought perhaps it's not the right time to do this, so I put it on hold. But then later, that agent contacted me again, and there was a more senior role available, again in Saudi, and then I didn't want to pass this. I didn't want this to pass by, so I actually made a move to do this, and yeah, that's where I ended up in Saudi Arabia.
And how did you break that news to your wife and family? Because of course, as you say, it wasn't just a move for Steve, right?
Well, it wasn't like breaking the news. I mean, my wife knew that I had aspirations to do this, so we were discussing this all along. And certainly when I didn't go ahead with the supervisor role, then we knew that it was still there. It was still something that I wanted to do. So when this other position came around, then yes, we were kind of understanding. My wife was understanding that this is what I wanted to do. I've got to say, in the beginning, it's ultimately when I was working overseas, it was on a kind of married basis. My wife and family would join me, but not at the beginning. When I first started, it was on a not single status. I could have taken my wife out, but I started like that until I kind of got familiar with where I was, and then eventually my wife followed, and we settled down there.
Wow, incredible. So when you first relocated your family overseas, how did that land? I mean, was it difficult for your wife and family to call their new country home, or did it all actually just land well?
It was, and of course you're in a country, like Saudi Arabia, and everybody has an opinion on how that is. But you look back with rose-tinted spectacles, and you remember the good things, perhaps forget the bad things. But all in all, it actually wasn't bad. You were living in an expat community. Lifestyle was pretty good, actually. Work was good. It was quite fulfilling in what I was doing. As I said, it was a more senior role, from what I'd been doing before. So I learned a lot. It was a kind of a countrywide role in Saudi, traveling around a lot. Amazingly, traveling in the company jet. I mean, can you believe?
Yeah.
And visiting the different locations, as I said. So again, looking back, it was quite good, actually. The weather was fantastic, obviously, and living in this, again, it doesn't sound so nice or glamorous, but living this compound life, this expat community, but it was quite nice. It was quite good community spirit, I would say. So we thrived, actually. It was quite good.
And when you took that role, Steve, appreciating it was probably for a variety of reasons, but was it about you making a sacrifice now so that from a professional perspective you could get on, or was it about the income that made it attractive? What was it that
it was all
drove you to the role?
It was all about improving myself.
Right. Okay.
Improving. Again, if I think back in my time when I was a truck mechanic or technician, and I just had, again, I'm not wringing this down. I mean, it's a fantastic occupation to be in, but I just realized that's not where I wanted to be. You know, I did feel that I had the ability to move into, you know, kind of junior management as it was at the time, and always about improving myself, always about improving my career, not necessarily about, you know, about the financial gains, because it wasn't that fantastic, to be honest. You know, people have a view that it is very lucrative. Not really. It was okay, but not, you know, not fantastic.
Yeah, point being, it was you investing in you.
Yeah, 100%.
To give yourself more options in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yes. Understand. And tell me then, obviously you spent, you know, 2 and a bit decades at Volvo. When was it you started to think about life beyond Volvo?
Again, having, you know, moved around different countries, you know, working with Volvo, and then again, I had a, you know, in being in countries that I really had an interest in, not least I spent time in South Africa, and then when I finished my time there, so that would have been the end of 2010, and then I had a period of time at home in the UK, so 4 years working from home, although I was still traveling a lot. I was still traveling overseas, you know, intensely, I would say. But then I also had a yearning to live and work in Australia. And again, there was a position that came along that I pursued, and I got the position in Australia. Again, as you understand, many people have a yearning to be in Australia. There's a kind of a mind's eye or a vision of how Australia would be. So yes, I pursued that. I got that position. But then after being there, you know, not perhaps a year, I think 10, 11 months, then I got a call to work for then the company Knorr-Bremse. And after working for Volvo for such a long time, 25 years or so, then to move to another company was quite a pull, actually. It was, but then I would say, then I was probably older, of course, and then it was probably the financial pull on that. So that was quite a lucrative move, you know, from a personal point of view, and also from a career point of view. So again, a much more senior position, and then I would say that was the beginning, if you like, of moving into perhaps more senior management, and then you know, kind of wanting to go further from there. Again, at the time, I would say perhaps to grow my corporate career profile. Of course, things turned out a little bit later on, but yes, that was the intention, to move to Hong Kong.
It's funny, Steve, because at the beginning of the conversation, you said that in your eye, an entrepreneur is someone who takes risk.
Yes.
Which is why perhaps you sometimes question whether being described as an entrepreneur is appropriate. However, I'm sure many of our viewers watching this podcast would say someone who has traveled so extensively, someone who's taken jobs in jurisdictions they've never worked, is someone who's taking quite a significant amount of risk. But of course, to you, that wasn't seen as, or nor did you feel it was, you taking risk. But I suspect to most people it probably is.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, in the time, you know, in the different roles that I had been, I mean, the countries that I've worked, I mean, Saudi, Belgium, Iran, you know, I think most people might be surprised at that. Then South Africa. So working in those countries, and also traveling a lot whilst in those countries. So being in Belgium, for example, I was traveling, you know, extensively through Eastern Europe, to Central Asia, you know, really obscure countries, you know, Uzbekistan, of course, eventually relocating to Iran. So traveling as much as I did, then moving to a country wasn't as daunting as other people may think.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And actually, it's like anything, isn't it? You know, when you haven't ever sat on the back of a bike, it's quite unnerving, quite a scary thing to do. But actually, once you've done it once, it becomes a little easier the next time.
Yeah.
And therefore, actually, the more you do, the better you get at it, and the less risk you see attaching to the same activity. Traveling overseas and doing business overseas is no different, is it? So you mentioned that, of course, despite having a phenomenal 2.5 decades at Volvo, KB came along and presented this really exciting opportunity. When was that in terms of what year? And could you just tell me a little bit about the first role that you had at KB, please, Steve?
So yeah, that I joined KB in Hong Kong. That was in 2015. And then I spent 4 years in Hong Kong, and my role was responsible for business in Southeast Asian markets. So again, traveling extensively through all the Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asian countries, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, but then going further afield into Korea and Taiwan. Again, for the business, travel a lot to meet colleagues, because KB had other organizations in Japan. So yeah, again, traveled extensively whilst there. And then having the responsibility for Southeast Asia, then an opportunity came along because KB acquired the steering gear business of Hitachi. And that meant that we needed to set up found a company and set up a facility in Thailand. And the fact that I was the responsible person for Thailand led me to actually being the incumbent and being the person located and relocated to Thailand with my wife. My kids are grown up now, so they are not with us any longer. So moving to Thailand and setting up pretty much a greenfield site, I would say, in Thailand. A new production facility.
Yeah. So, how did KB find themselves owning, of course, a business that was set up and, of course, still to this day is headquartered here in the Northeast?
Well, KB headquartered in Germany, but I was working for the Asia Pacific region, headquarters in Hong Kong. But then, so what was your question? How did I end up back here in the UK?
No, so how did KB go about acquiring GT Group here in the Northeast? Yes. And of course, it's then going to be definitely fascinating to Steve to understand how you ended up back in the UK.
Yeah, because it's an amazing coincidence, actually. So yes, in 2016, so KB's business, they are, automotive product suppliers to the commercial vehicle industry, trucks, buses, etc.
So to the likes of Volvo, right?
To the likes of Volvo, Scania, MAN, etc. And with a huge portfolio, I would say, many different products. But as part of their growth, the strategies, that they follow, then they were often acquiring businesses, including GT. So in 2016, so KB acquired GT. GT were the providers of a certain product range, again supporting the commercial vehicle industry, and that fitted into KB's strategy at that time. So they acquired KB in 2016. And interestingly, I mean, this is so coincidental. So a colleague of mine at Volvo, he was forever talking to me, do I know this company GT? And of course, he knew I was from the Northeast. GT is Northeast based. And he would say, do I know GT? GT means Jeff Turnbull. Do I know this guy, Jeff Turnbull? I said, no, of course I don't. I don't know everyone. And then when KB acquired GT, then there was an announcement on the internal internet pages. So it was one coincidence with my colleague, as I said. And then on this website, announcing that KB had acquired GT, and I saw a picture of a guy. I said, I know that guy. And he was, I don't know him well, but he is the husband of a family friend of ours. So again, the coincidence just kept coming. So yeah, anyway, back to the point. KB acquired GT in 2016.
So how did you, Steve, end up effectively relocating back to the Northeast to run the GT business for KB?
So after, convoluted story.
That's right.
After so many years overseas, we decided, my wife and I, okay, now's the time. Now we want to return home. We enjoyed our time working overseas, but yes, we thought that the time was right. We're getting older. We want to enjoy our time. We never sold our house. We always kept our home here. So yes, we wanted to return. So I made that known with KB. And then I started the process a year before I actually returned to UK. And then I started the process of looking into, again, with colleagues at KB, looking into possibilities for a position in Europe, actually. That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
Perhaps home-based or European-based. And then, utter coincidence, there was this position, this MD position at GT available, and everything's just fitted into place amazingly.
So when did you, relocate, Steve, back to the UK to run the GT business?
So that was just over 4 years. So that would be March 22. Okay. So when that happened, yeah.
Wow, incredible. A bit of a divergence, but I'd like to just ask you a direct question because, of course, you talk there about a series of coincidences,
yes,
all of which sound too much of a coincidence, actually. Do you believe in fate?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I don't.
So do you genuinely think all of those things just happened, not as a consequence of design and certainly not as a consequence of premeditation? Are these just a selection of events that have all landed well for you?
Yeah, just pure coincidence.
Okay.
Pure coincidence, yes.
Okay, got it. So obviously you returned back to the Northeast to run on behalf of KB, the GT business that had been acquired, and this was in 2022. Mm-hmm. When you did come back to the UK to run the GT business, what did you think perhaps that business would give you and allow you to achieve?
No, that's a very good question, because the reality is, starting that position and speaking with people at GT. So my boss at the time, we knew that, and even in my time in Asia Pacific, I would hear about different companies within the KB world, and we knew that KB was not necessarily in a good position, both from a operating and a financial point of view. Yeah. But it was often talked about that the integration with KB was not that good. And then I knew, and I kind of took on the challenge as well, very much so. It was also said that at some point something would happen. There would be some change, but it wasn't known what that would be. So. But later we talked about, it would be sold, it would be relocated, perhaps closed down in the worst case scenario, although not feasible because we had customer contracts actually. But something was going to happen at GT. And so my role when I came in there was very much to start to try to pull things together in terms of integration. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to run down the people before me actually. There was a manager, an MD before me, and I think he did a lot to move it along in the time that he was there. But still, there was a lot to do in terms of doing things and integrating ourselves in the way that KB do them. KB is a corporate company that they have very set kind of ways of doing things, which are quite good actually. So then from the beginning, I would say, and this is really fundamental to taking us to where we are today, in actual fact, it was to put a plan together, a strategy together to, okay, what do we need to do as an organization, both from a, considering financial, situation that we were in, which is not great, I have to say, but then also as an operational situation. So how do we do things to get closer to KB, get the benefit of what they can provide to us? So we started that strategy. So that would have been, towards the end of 22. And it's that strategy which continued. Perhaps you want to ask me other questions, but I kind of take us there already. That moved us into, the fact that KB then ultimately put us up for sale, and it was that strategy in our fulfilling that strategy, achieving on the points of that. I mean, substantial restructuring activities what we were going through, and it was that in that story, in that equity story that came together, that was attractive for would-be buyers. As part of the divestment from KB.
And how involved, Steve, were you in preparing the business to be sold and actually fronting buyers?
Significantly. We did use, an agent, corporate finance agent, who, in many ways, again, if I'm a little bit disparaging of what they did, they took our strategy and they put a little bit spin on it, and then they, created this equity story that was already there in our restructure plans, and then I'm not saying that they didn't do things, of course, but it was that plan that was put out in such a way that was attractive to buyers, and myself and my colleagues, we were very much part of that. We were definitely not standing back and waiting for the agent to do the things. We were very much part of it. It was our story, and we were definitely the ones front and center of telling the story to would-be buyers.
Yes, and obviously, Steve, at that time, you and your management team not only had restructured the business and were turning around the financial fortunes of the GT business, but as you say, you will definitely have poured hours and hours of blood, sweat, and tears into that business. So when KB made you aware of the fact that they'd appointed a CF advisory firm to sell GT Group, did you and your then management team not think about not only whether you perhaps could buy the business, but what it might mean for you as sort of employees, bearing in mind you'd only been in the GT business for a short period?
Yeah,
right?
but it was a year. I mean, it was more or less a year to the day from me joining GT to then being informed that we would be put up for sale. And then, so at the time, I didn't immediately divulge that to my colleagues. So I kept that, because there's still a lot of discussion going on with myself and KB. But then, once we started, and as I said, it was quite intensive for us to be part of this. And then go on, just ask me the question again. I forgot the point you were making.
Yeah, I was keen to understand, whilst KB was saying to you in management, right, you're going to sell this business for us. Yes. I'm just wondering whether you and management, in those dark nights, ever asked yourself, should we be buying it?
We did. Honestly, Carl, we did. But I would say that it was, to a large extent, it was in jest. It was, again, part of the intense activity that we were going through. We had a financial director in place, and that wasn't really working out.
Okay.
And then he left us. So we had a long period of time where we didn't have an FD in place. So while earlier we were talking about, is it something that we could pursue? But I would say a little bit in jest, because in all honesty, certainly myself and even the other key people in the company, we didn't really have the wherewithal, to be honest.
So by that you mean understanding as to how to unlock a management buyout at that time?
Understanding, contacts, knowledge of the business, of the corporate finance world. So we didn't have that. And therefore, when we got a new financial director in place, so we were well down the road of completing a sale to another another buyer. So yes, so to answer your question, yes, it was very much in our mind, but we didn't act on it, and also we were going through some of the difficulties in the company, and things just started to, they kind of transpired the way that they did.
Sure, understand, Steve. So obviously, the GT business was sold by KB to R Capital, which of course is a London-based private equity house. So you and your management team, of course, continue to be employed by GT Group, but now running the business on behalf of a financial investor. Can you just tell me a little bit about, I guess, how you went from that position, i.e. now being owned by R Capital, to actually start really trying to scratch the itch that always existed, which was to think about how do we buy this business?
Well, I mean, it starts going back a little bit before, Carl, in as much that when we were told that we would be put on the market by KB. So at first, so myself and my colleagues, at first, it was a little bit of a shock, although I kind of knew deep down it was coming.
Yeah.
But then also we were quite happy about this, because now it was the time, we felt it was the time that we could break away from KB. So while KB is very good, very competent as a big organization, a big corporate, the fact is that it wasn't really working together. We weren't gelling, they were not the best owners for us. So having that possibility to move away from KB, we were quite happy that would come about. But then, of course, ultimately, we knew that we were still not the owners. I mean, it would be another owner, i.e. R Capital. So they came in. I've got to say, through the sales process, we worked quite well with R Capital leading up to the sales process. They in terms of other buyers that were available, they were, Germany based, whereas R Capital are UK, London based, as you said. So I think there was a connection there from the beginning. Yeah. So I think we understood each other quite well. And then, of course, once the acquisition went through, then yes, suddenly we were owned by R Capital. But I would say that the way that we were working and the strategy that we were following didn't really change at all. We would just continue to do what we were doing, and then just being part of R Capital. Of course, the pressure came on us to report and to ensure that we informed R Capital of what we were doing. Pretty much the same as reporting towards KB. But then the fact that we were doing things quite well, in actual fact, it seems quite strange that we were put up for sale in a very short space of time. We were acquired by R Capital in January 25, and then we were put up for sale in July 25. So it would seem that, that's a very short time frame. And normally, private equity companies, ultimately they will sell a company. They will take a company and ultimately they will sell them. And we knew that we would have perhaps a 3 or 4 year time frame, very much with the intention that when that time frame comes around, then yes, we want to go through, an MBO. It came about so quickly, and then because we were doing so well, actually, not because we were doing bad, because we were fulfilling our plans, and then we thought, yes, now is the time. Now is the opportunity for us to make this move, to present an MBO, feasibility case, if you like.
Yes. Well, you said 2 things there, Steve, I'd love to just reflect on. The first is the difference between a trade buyer and a financial investor or
Correct.
financial acquirer. Because, of course, with KB, big corporate, they like to integrate businesses they buy. And sometimes the challenge there is perhaps 2 and 2 doesn't equal 5.
Yeah.
Of course, with R Capital, whilst they owned the business, they were letting you run the business as you saw fit,
Yes.
which is why the business prospered, right? So I think certainly when shareholders are thinking about the sale of their business, they do need to really understand the difference between a trade buyer and a financial sponsor, because the 2 can deliver something different,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
The second thing which you've highlighted is R Cap selling the business within less than 1 year of acquiring the business is such a short time frame. As you say, Steve, normally a PE house will own an asset for 3 to 5 years. But that is a consequence of them buying at the right time and the business performing significantly during that short time. Hence, they could generate their return. So, of course, our capital appointed a corporate finance advisory firm to sell the GT business, the business that you and your management team were running. And of course, whilst I have intimate understanding as to what came next, given I advised you and management on the MBO, could you just talk a little bit about how you and management went about making sure that second time round, the opportunity didn't pass you by?
Well, yes, and as you know, because you quite rightly say, Carl, you're involved, quite significantly in this. It was tricky because our capital did, from the time when they informed us, so myself and our financial director Ian, we visited our capital headquarters in London. This would have been in June 25. And then they informed us what they wanted to do, what their intentions were. So immediately after, so moving into July, immediately after, they put us up for sale, and they involved another corporate finance firm to then put us on the market. And then what we were trying to do was to say, guys, just hang on a second, just hold on. We understand and we respect what you want to do, and ultimately we will do that if that's how things go, but just allow us to get, to present a feasibility of ourselves, going through an MBO. And we did struggle with our capital. We had quite a few run-ins on that, but ultimately we were able to put a case together. It was again, as you quite know, as you know very well, Carl, it was, again, a very credible case, very credible business, very credible proposition that we were able to put forward. There were more than one possibility in terms of, providing for this MBO. So, things just came together. And then ultimately we put that case together towards our capital. And they, once they understood that it could work, then they said, okay, guys, you can do this. We will go for this. We will allow you to complete the MBO, but then with a very strict timeline. So then we had to move very, very quickly, again, as you know, to do this. But we did it. I mean, we did it in record time. Actually, you will know more than I do about these things. But for me, it was very, very speedy, I would say.
It would be really fascinating, Steve, from your perspective as MD, fronting all of the conversations with RCAP, just to understand the key things that you think gave RCAP the confidence that you and management could execute the buyout. What do you think really did influence their willingness to allow you the chance to buy the business?
I mean, honestly, Carl, I think you know the answer. I mean, the one thing is that, would they get paid? Would they receive the funds? Or would it actually work? Or if there was a risk that it would be protracted and take longer. I think ultimately we knew, and perhaps they knew, that ultimately it probably could work, but if it was going to be protracted, then no, then they would just pursue a sale using the corporate finance company that they had in place. So yeah, it was all about getting paid at the time frames there.
Well, there you are. It's about surety and about minimizing execution risk, right, Steve? And I think the reason we were able to successfully advise you and your 3 colleagues on the sole purchase of the business was because actually from the off, we carried out, as you say, Steve, that MBO feasibility, which was all about understanding the value that we as management could place on the business and the level of funding we were confident we could secure to fund the acquisition. And of course, therefore, really, the thing that I think was the most important to RCAP in your MBO proposal was that we had diligently formed a view on valuation, fundability, and in turn, our ability to execute, which meant any risk was removed from their perspective. And again, a lot of management teams watching this podcast, Steve, who themselves might have tried and failed to buy a business that they run, or might be running a business and might be thinking about buying a business but don't feel it's possible. The key is assessing how feasible a buyout is, but getting proper advice from a firm like mine who's advised on hundreds of MBOs like yours. Because of course it's only easy when you know how, right?
I think so. And you know, I've said this to you before, Carl. I mean, for me, not being involved in this world as such before, and then finding out that, you know, that there are, you know, multiple possibilities that you can put in place to do this. That was quite an eye opener for me.
Yep.
And you know, and then once myself and my colleagues were aware that, you know, that those possibilities were there, then of course we were kind of, you know, really motivated for this to work, and, you know, and pushed like hell for this to work, and also driven by the time frame that our capital put on us.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the management buyout of GT Group completed just before the end of 25, which saw you and three of your colleagues buy 100% of the business. And of course, last year, the business was a circa 40 million turnover, circa 3 mil EBITDA business, so a very sizable, profitable concern. Let me ask you from a risk perspective, because at the beginning of the podcast, you dispelled the fact that I could refer to you as an entrepreneur. Obviously, you took risk to buy GT Group, as did your three colleagues, Steve. How did you get comfortable with taking that level of risk? Because of course, as you say, perhaps risk isn't something to that point you had chose to take. So how did you get comfortable being exposed to financial risks?
I think believing in the business, Carl, believing in, you know, the business that we have, the business that we do, the customers that we have, you know, that these are, you know, all blue chip customers. You know, we have good agreements with those. Part of our restructuring activities, I would say, you know, again, going back to 22, if you like, or certainly going back to when we were divested by KB. So there were a lot of, you know, activities, functions that were taken care of by KB, like our sales functions, like our R&D functions. So while we have R&D people on site, but the management of them, you know, of that, you know, that department, if you like, was not me. It was the management was in Munich. Purchasing, that was not us. So I would say that going through the process of being divested by KB, then we had to build our teams to be able to deal with that. So not least, you know, so things that we were really not doing before. So purchasing. So we brought in a purchasing guy and then built a team. Our sales, we had a hiccup along the way. We had one guy in place, didn't really work out. Lovely guy, but it didn't work out. But we knew that we needed to engage more with the customers. We needed to then start to win back, if you like, our relationship with customers. That's something that GT had all along, you know, years ago, before it was acquired by KB. So we needed to do that again, get closer to the customers. So we were doing that, I would say, from 23, 24 onwards. We were then building our own functions, our own team, our own strength, and then starting to work with customers and suppliers. And, you know, so I would say having the confidence in our business is really what, you know, allowed us to kind of make the decisions that we did.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. And of course, you know, you now have three people sat beside you who together as a four, you on the business, you as MD, of course, Ian as CFO, you have a phenomenal HRD and Kelly, and of course, Dean as sales director. So it's interesting what you said there, because actually it goes back to my sort of bike analogy earlier, because actually if you have knowledge, if you have control, and actually if you are very confident in a business's ability to perform, the perception is there's no risk being taken. even though you are taking financial risk, right? So it's interesting, isn't it, just to think about where we started the conversation, because you and management have taken significant personal risk to buy 100% of this business, but you don't see it as risk because you have knowledge.
Yes.
And you're confident in your management team's ability to continue to run and scale the business. How have people responded to the MBO, Steve? Because I guess to this point, you have been an employee in a big corporate for your entire career. Now you and your fellow shareholders own a Sunderland-based, privately owned business. Somewhat different. So how have people responded?
Durham-based, by the way.
Yeah. Well,
yes, not you. Honestly, people have responded extremely well. So all along, when we were going through this process, first of all, we wanted to inform our customers as to what we were doing. I mean, in all honesty, they don't really like to have private equity as owners of business, the type of industry that we're in, but it does happen. So there's a acceptance there, but they would prefer not to. So leading up to the MBO, we were very close. We kept the customers informed, got their opinion as to what they thought, because if they took a view that was not really favorable, that would make us kind of consider what we were doing. Also our workforce. So we would have town hall meetings and we would inform the workforce, first the senior management team, and then the workforce as to what we were doing. And I would say the response was really good. I mean, from a local point of view, local workforce point of view, they very much wanted to, be locally owned, go back to the way that it was run before, supporting, a locally owned company, supporting the local community. And that's how we very much feel as well. We really do. We do care about our workforce. We do want it to be a local, homegrown, community supporting, place of work. And then back to customers, since we've completed the MBO, we've engaged with the customers again, and again, they're very happy with what we're doing. And I would say, and again, it's part of us building our relationship with customers. And actually we've had a lot of inquiries, a lot of, more projects on our table now, following this. Typically our business, it's not business that you may get an order today and then you start.
Yeah, long lead times, right?
It's long. It's projects. It's 3 or 4 years in the making. Working together with a customer. Developing a product. So it's a long time frame. But we've got a lot of inquiries on our table. So our business looks good. Our outlook is pretty good. We mapped that out as you can imagine. We set up a facility in India as well. So we were in India recently. So we launched that facility. It's been in production from the beginning of the year. And we aspire to have a facility in the US. Again, we have a lot of inquiries, a lot of business opportunities to be based in the US. So again, I will never say that we have this in the bag, never. I mean, I'm always cautious, but a lot of good interest, a lot of good opportunity we have available.
And of course, Steve, now as alongside your 3 shareholders, sole owner of GT Group, when you reflect on your career over many decades, is there any part of you that sort of wonders whether if you had bought a business sooner, you could have achieved more or not? Is that not even something you think about?
No, I mean, my corporate career took the direction that it took, organically, naturally. If an opportunity had come along for me to own a business, I would have definitely considered it. Going back to my early days as a truck mechanic, I had ambition to set up my own kind of repair facility. But again, it just didn't work out. But in terms of where we are now, I wish this had happened 10 years ago. or even 5 years ago. So, it was an opportunity that came along. It was an incredible opportunity that came along, and we were in the right place. The business was good. Again, back to the restructuring activities that we were doing, we were starting to make things, turn things around. The support from you guys, the corporate finance opportunities that we had, everything just fell into place. It was really good. Yeah. But of course, I wish it had been 5 or 10 years earlier. I really do.
Yeah. No, well, as you said, there are lots of stakeholders and lots of things that have to align to make a transaction of this magnitude possible. To anyone, Steve, who is watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, who might be MD in a business within a corporate and might perhaps be 10, 15 years your junior, and they have this entrepreneurial itch and they'd love to perhaps get some equity in the business they run, but they really don't know where to start because they don't want to sort of jeopardize their employment with their corporate owner. But hey, you get one life and you can't sit on your hands either. What advice would you give them?
Well, it's funny enough, I met somebody a couple of weeks ago and they were saying exactly that. They were in a senior role in a particular company. They were very inspired by what we had done. In fact, he was picking my brains as to what we were doing or had done, and had ambitions to do something similar. So my advice was pursue it. Definitely pursue it. In fact, I gave him your details, Carl, to be perfectly honest. I realized with what he was saying, it was perhaps a little bit more complicated than our situation. So it's, perhaps would not really, fall into line in the same way that ours did. But nonetheless, pursue possibilities, investigate what can be done. Feasibility study, if you like. Yeah.
It's interesting, because I think employees who haven't set up a business before and haven't grown a privately owned business before often think wrongly that to run a business and own a business, you have to take unnecessary risk. But as you've just described, not only is it not seen as risk when you have knowledge and have confidence in the business in mention, but actually nowadays, because of the funding landscape as it is, whether it be venture capital trusts who will invest in early stage loss-making businesses, be it private equity, be it debt funds, there are so many different ways you can fund a startup and the growth of the business without taking personal risk. So I think the point you've made about the need to seek advice and guidance from those who've been there before is so important. I think there are so many professionals who are entrepreneurs in the making, but just aren't receiving the advice and guidance they need.
Again, I agree. And another good point is, for the last 3-4 years from when I joined GT, we've been going through a cycle of being through sales processes. And as you said at the beginning, an immense amount of work. I mean, really intense. And often we feel that, we were not able to get on with our day job because we were so involved in these sales processes. And while we always wanted to kind of keep our head up and understand what's going on out there, not least networking, getting out into the business community, getting out into the industry, meeting customers, meeting local, Northeast businesses. While we always wanted to do that, myself in particular, while I always wanted to do that, then I just felt I didn't have time because it was just so intense what we were doing. Recently, now having gone through the MDO, now we're out there. Now we are networking more. We're interacting with Business Durham in particular, visiting different networking events, and doing that. Then you find that there's so many opportunities there. The corporate finance world, the funding that is available to do things. This is again a bit of an eye opener for me. It was so yeah, there are possibilities out there.
I agree. And that's why as a corporate finance professional, Steve, I absolutely love what I do because it's about helping people realize the opportunity in front of them, often opportunities they don't even realize exist. And that's genuinely what inspires me as an advisor day to day. So obviously, you, Steve, and your management team now own 100% of the business, which perhaps is something you had hoped would happen, but didn't perhaps know would, certainly not at this stage in your career. Tell me what's next for Steve.
Well, you know, what we have on the horizon now, as I said, we have our facility in India, and we have a lot of opportunity there. So I want India to flourish. I want it to bed down, you know, to kind of cement what we have and grow what we have. And likewise for the US, you know, so they are kind of 3 or 4 years in the making, I would say, again, project based. So that is my immediate horizon, if you like, really establish, so grow our business, you know, really get this international footing that we already have in place with India, and certainly, you know, the aim to be in the US, because then I think our company will then, you know, go further from strength to strength.
Yeah. Understand. Thanks, Steve. And of course, you know, you mentioned certainly, perhaps in your early career at Volvo, quite specifically, that you travelled extensively, and you had a very understanding wife and family, which you need if you're asking them to up sticks and move to the many countries that you work from, Steve. Over the years, do you feel you've sacrificed?
Oh yeah. I'm pleased you came back to this, actually, Carl, because, you know, of course, my wife, before I came here today, she said, I hope I get a mention in it. And that's absolutely true, because my wife and family, my wife in particular, I could not have done, you know, what we have done without her. Because, you know, my time working overseas, while we were together some of the time, not all of the time, you know, there were assignments where, you know, Iran, South Africa, where we were not together as a family. So yes, me, you know, personally, and my wife and my family, yes, we have made huge sacrifices. You know, sometimes I look back and think, was it the right thing to do? You know, I've missed so much time with my kids, but they haven't suffered for it. We have a great family, we have a fantastic family, great relationship with my kids, and now their wives and girlfriends. I mean, it's just fantastic. So they haven't suffered. I think we have prospered, and we have grown as a family. You know, so yes, sacrifices, but also benefited as well. You know, by, you know, the kind of work life that I've had.
So if you were to have your time again, am I right to assume you would not do anything differently in that?
No, I don't think I would. Again, amazing experiences, honestly, amazing working life. You know, another key point, again, just to come back to, you know, when you ask as to what's driven me to kind of ultimately own a company. But I would say my working life, certainly overseas, I have been a bit of a loner in as much that, you know, while of course I've had bosses, I've had superiors, of course, but most of the time, what I do is very much down to me. So I'm pretty driven, self-driven. So I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed the, you know, having the freedom as such to do things the way I think that they should be done. You know, and of course seeking out guidance, you know, now and then as I need it. But I've never had anybody breathing down my neck as such, telling me that you need to do it in such a way.
Yes.
So from that point of view, yes, it's been very rewarding from a working point of view.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think certainly now more than ever before, Steve, I think professionals, entrepreneurs, business owners, all grapple with this work-life balance. And there's so many podcasts out there, and there's so much content out there, really encouraging people to sort of find a balance, not only which works, but I think quite worryingly effectively results in one not having to work.
Yes.
In pursuit of a life balance. But of course, it's not true, right? So I think that my opinion, and it sounds like yours is similar, is that anything worth having requires sacrifice, hard work, and you have to do things that most people aren't willing to do, right?
Yeah.
You just do.
You've got to work. You've got to put the hours.
That's right. And I don't think that I genuinely have ever had the pleasure, Steve, of having anyone on my podcast who wouldn't agree that the things they've achieved would have been possible without perhaps not spending the right amount of time with their children, not taking Sammy to sports day, not being able to take their partner out for Valentine's dinner. But hey, you can't do everything, and you have to prioritize rather than sacrifice stuff.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. So while I acknowledge that yes, indeed, we've made sacrifices, but we're okay now. We're in a good place now. We have benefited from this. But yes, definitely hard work. You need to put the hours in. And again, back to the thing that I said at the beginning. So working for this, starting as a truck mechanic, working for this local company.
Yes.
Working long hours as I did, that's what was expected. When many around me, other young people that started in the company, at the same time or after me, just could not do that or would not do that, and fell by the wayside. So myself and others, I was not the only one. We, were prepared to put the hours in and to work hard, physical work as it was then.
That's right.
But that's what got into me. That is the work ethic. That's what you need to do to kind of get on in life. And I don't know, that's hopefully what I've done.
No, well, you absolutely have. And I was going to ask a question, but I think you've answered it. But I'm just going to check, Steve, that I'm right in what I think you've said there. So do you believe that work ethic, that grit and willingness to graft, do you think that's more important than being intelligent? Because, for instance, you and I will know lots of people who perhaps academically did not do well, perhaps academically haven't done well because they don't have an ability to do well when it comes to academic performance. But of course they have 2 hands, 2 legs, and can graft. Do you think hard graft alone can be enough to become successful?
Again, great question, because this is a, I have my own self-doubts often, Carl. And I sometimes think, do I really have the ability, the academic ability, the intellect to do this, to do what I do, and even through my career, many people, so certainly I do, often have this self-doubt, and maybe I'm not, the most adept at, having the academic and the intellect that is needed to do what I do, but I make up for it in the graft, in the hard work. So I know sometimes I have to compensate, to kind of cover what I think I might be, falling short of, in terms of other abilities. Even to the point where, so my education, don't know if you're going to go there, but here you go. I'm talking about it now. With my education, I left school. I was okay at school, don't get me wrong, but I was having such a good time at school. I really enjoyed my time. So I left school with, I took my, in the day, they were called O-levels. But I failed them. I went through my O-levels and I failed them, and I left school and I think, my God. And again, it's not that I didn't have the ability to do it, but I just was having too good a time, too young, and so I left school, and then I got into then into the career that I did, and also having the mindset, okay, if this is what I do, then I make the best of it. But years later, feeling that well, through my working life, then I wanted to go back into education, so I did, but from a working point of view. So I did my ONC and HNC, but then I always felt that I never got that degree. So I did that later in life. I just felt that I was missing something, that I felt that I hadn't achieved. So I did that later in life, just to say that, yes, I can do this. So yeah, I think I completed that in 2014.
There you are.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that demonstrates one is never too old to learn, and every day is a school day, right, Steve? Regardless of your age or your elevation in business, for sure. And for the avoidance of doubt, you sort of said there sometimes you question whether you have the intellect, the ability, the knowledge to be doing what you're doing. Well, for the avoidance of doubt, you evidently do, because you're doing it, Steve. And I think being self-conscious is a strength, because I do wonder whether if one isn't self-conscious, they could become arrogant. So I think it's actually a real admirable trait that you on a regular basis almost feel so proud of where you are at, and so excited to be given the chance to do what you do with the people you do it with, that you question whether you are worthy. But I think that is a real strong trait.
Thanks,
It means
Carl.
you take nothing for granted.
It's good to hear, yeah.
My last question, Steve, for today is this. I know you're a family man. And whilst, of course, over the years, perhaps you've encouraged your wife and children to support your global pursuits, you've done so, I know, for a reason, and that's to give them the world answer. If I was to now sit down with your kids and ask them to describe you in one word, what would it be?
I think they would agree and acknowledge that, yes, I'm a hard worker, that I put, time and effort into my work, my career, sometimes to the detriment of the family, but they know that is very much what I do. I think they've always known that. They've known that for years. My wife also, and my family, and my immediate family. Yeah, so that's what they would say.
Well, Steve, thank you for being on my Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast today. You are a business owner and in turn entrepreneur, and I hope that starts to sit comfortably with you. But for now, Steve, huge thanks for your insights.
Very good. Thanks, Carl. Excellent. Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure today having Steve Wright, MD of GT Group, on my podcast. It's been brilliant to understand a little bit more about Steve's corporate career, starting out at Volvo, more latterly KB, before the opportunity came about for Steve, alongside his management team, to execute the debt-funded MBO of GT Group. Of course, whilst many of us would only have seen Steve and management buy GT Group last year, it was really unsurprising to hear that Steve has had that entrepreneurial itch for many, many years, perhaps waiting for the right opportunity. And of course, opportunity is one thing, having the confidence in the business, the management team within the business, and knowing that the business that one runs is viable as an independent enterprise is something very different. And it seems Steve has spent decades accumulating the knowledge, building the relationships needed to be able to execute a once-in-a-career management buyout, which I was delighted alongside my colleagues to advise Steve and management on back end of last year. Steve clearly is someone who loves to travel, spending decades traveling the globe, building businesses for corporates, building relationships that now Steve is able to benefit from having built. Steve, like many of us, of course, is a family man. And whilst, yes, along the way he has made sacrifices, I guess anything worth having is not easy. And as a consequence, I suspect anyone who achieves greatness will have, along the way, made sacrifices. For me, actually, I don't think we should view these things as sacrifices, but instead, opportunities to invest in ourselves and our future. And of course, let's appreciate what goes in will come out proportionately. And Steve made it no surprise to me that his super strength is a willingness to graft, to dig deep when most people perhaps will be sat on the bench, appreciating sometimes the man who's working the hardest will be the man who has the most luck. It was fascinating to hear Steve almost not comfortable with me describing him as an entrepreneur, because he had perhaps a view as to the characteristics and indeed traits of an entrepreneur. But for me, actually, an entrepreneur is somebody who takes calculated risk to pursue opportunities to create value for themselves and others. And Steve has, without doubt, done that over a very successful career. And of course, now as one of 4 shareholders of GT Group in the Northeast. The final thing that definitely and I hope you, our viewers, will take away from today's podcast is that actually, sometimes one does need to walk before they can run. Accumulating knowledge, deep sector expertise, building relationships, understanding how different people in different countries do business are all of the things that can't be rushed. They do take a lifetime to refine. And therefore, whilst perhaps Steve did have the entrepreneurial itch and would have liked to have scratched it sooner, it seems last year is when the stars aligned for Steve, and Steve was able to become an entrepreneur and business owner. As a client and friend, genuinely, I am delighted to have had Steve on my podcast today, and I wish him, Ian, Dean and Kelly, the now shareholders of GT Group, the absolute best for the next chapter in the GT Group story. But for now, you have been watching Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. If you would like to download this podcast or any other podcast in season 2 of our Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast series, then please do so from wherever you download and consume your podcasts from. I really look forward to welcoming you, our viewers, back to future podcasts. But for now, thank you.